Good afternoon and welcome back to our Barbicide webinars, our weekly webinars. We have spent this summer trying to investigate some of the cool things about the cosmetology industry, some of the disciplines that I, for one, am not familiar with, but also some of the roles that are played within the industry that maybe people don't understand or would want to understand better. So our guest today is Kristy Underwood. Kristy is the executive officer of the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology in the state of California. I probably just messed that all up, but I think that pretty much sums up your title. You can correct me. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being here, Kristy.
Thank you for having me.
Did I screw it up, your title?
Nope, it's exactly right.
Okay. So one of the things that has, obviously people are talking today a lot about rules and boards and all of these types of things. And so I thought this was a great forum. We have over 1 million people that have these available, that get our emails and come to our website and our social media to view these types of things. So it was a good way to answer some questions. You are the executive officer of California. So what happens there may not be this exact same as every other state, but it's probably kind of similar. So tell us, what are the main functions of a board of cosmetology and barbering? What is your overriding guiding principle, so to speak?
So it's pretty simple. It's actually in law. I'm not sure if other states have it in law, but our law actually says that our main priority must be the protection of consumers.
Okay.
So, everything we do, from licensing to exams to enforcement, is all based on consumer protection.
Okay. And that's a big job, right? I mean, because you license how many different licenses do you have in California?
We have 5 different individual license types, plus we have a couple of apprenticeship programs within those, as well as the establishment licenses.
All right. And you're also, functionally speaking, your functionality is, what are the functions of your board? What do you functionally do? I know you make rules, but you also do testing, right? And any kind of, if somebody gets a complaint filed against them, those types of things.
So we do licensing. So we process all the applications, whether initial or renewal, for our 600+ thousand licensees. We examine, so we do the minimal competency exam to make sure that individuals going into the industry are minimally competent and not going to hurt a consumer once they get out into their business. Okay. And then after licensure and examination comes the enforcement. And our enforcement in California is primarily based on citation and fine. So we do inspections. We have inspectors throughout California that do inspections for health and safety violations. And each violation that we find has a fine attached to it. So we issue a lot of citations in California. And then ultimately, we could take significant disciplinary action, which would be revocation of a license. And that's if someone's continuing to not abide by health and safety rules, or someone has been harmed. So if we have an egregious consumer harm case, we're likely going to take strong action against a licensee for that.
Okay, so perfect. You guys, we talked about that there is infractions upon the rules, and you and I have worked together in the past on writing those rules, on making sure that as this industry evolves, as people, as we see new things sort of come online, new services, that type of thing, that if there is a necessary rule to butt up to that, to be enforcing of the safety of that rule does exist. And so one of the things that we've seen with COVID is that every state, and yours included, has written guidelines, guidelines that are over and above your existing rules. Do you foresee that some of those guidelines might become rules after COVID? Or, and I guess the second part of that question is, are those guidelines enforceable by inspection in a fine sort of way, or is it more of an education piece?
So the guidelines in California are guidelines that are technically required, and they're required because they were put out by an executive order from the governor. So they're guidelines, which sometimes we think are just guidelines. We don't really need to follow them. But when it comes out from our public health officer and is presented by the governor, they have the authority behind that to make those requirements. So the guidelines right now are requirements, but they're not requirements in the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology's laws and regulations. So we do not have a citation amount for violating the guidelines. Certain counties do. So when it comes to the guidelines, and we have 50 plus counties in California, and they're all being implemented differently, which is some of the confusion we have here. But some counties are taking a very, very strong stand on the guidelines and are issuing violations from the local police departments, and then some are not. So we don't issue citations for the actual guidelines, but what we do is if we feel you're putting a consumer at harm, then we're going to take disciplinary action. And so a good example is when we walk into a salon. Right now, California salons are in our monitored counties, which we have 32, I believe, monitored counties right now. They can only operate outside, which is a whole separate issue. And they, so no inside services can be offered. So if we happen to come across a salon that is offering inside services, and not only just offering inside services, but let's say they have a packed house. So they have all their chairs full, they have all their employees or booth renters are in there working, no one's wearing masks, no one's social distancing. We would consider that putting a consumer at risk because they're not following the guidelines at all, not even attempting. So those are the ones that we're really looking at right now, and that we could take disciplinary action against, and then work as well with the counties to take even more action against.
So you have an ongoing sort of situation there, because I'm guessing for you guys, it's really evolving because you've been open, you've been closed, you're outside, you know, and to your point, I think something that every state is struggling with, it's not unique to you, is that there is a, you just said, we have 32 monitored counties. How many counties do you have in all of California? Like 40? So you have
over 50.
Over 50, right? So it's different. It might be different literally across the street. So there's not a consistency. I had the question asked of me on a podcast. Would it have been easier if there was just one set of guidelines that everybody had to do, like all across the country? Like, this is what you have to do. And absolutely, that would have been easier, because what has happened is what you're seeing happening to you. And it's unfortunate. And I think a lot of angst and frustration gets taken out on the board, when in reality, you're really, your boss is the governor, and what they tell you to do, that's what the board has to do. And I think that's sometimes people forget that that's the way that this all works. So, I mean, I admire you guys' attempt to manage that much territory with all of the confusion and people's frustration. People are they just want to work, and we all understand that piece of it.
Right.
Go ahead. You were going to say something?
I think it's important that our board, I have a 9-member board here in California, and 5 of those members, so a majority, are public members, meaning that they don't have any connection to the industry whatsoever. They can't be a licensee, they can't be a school owner, they can't be affiliated in any monetary way with the industry. So in California, our boards are predominantly consumer run.
Oh, wow.
And of those 9 members, 7 of those members are appointed by the governor. So they're personally appointed by the governor of California. And the other 2 members, the remaining 2, one comes from our assembly and one comes from our Senate. So it's a big dynamic that people tend to forget, and they also forget that we are a majority consumer run board. And that changed several years back with all boards. Because we're consumer protection, they wanted it to be run by consumers in a sense. And so we have a majority of public members is what we refer them to, because you either have a public member or a professional member. The professionals are the people that hold licensees. So right now we're at 8 members, we're 4 and 4. So we have 4 public members and we have 4 professional members.
That's really unusual, because most states, as you may or may not know, I'm sure you do know, most states, the majority of the board, they may have 1 public seat on the board, maybe. And quite frankly, that's the one that's oftentimes vacant, right? Everybody else is a professional. They either hold a license, or they own a school, or they may operate salons. And so, to your point, that does make for a different dynamic in how decisions are made. And so that's really an interesting, I've been to your meetings, and I don't think I ever counted and actually figured that out on my own, but I think that's a really, it makes for a different dynamic. And in your state, you guys have the authority, the board has the authority to do rulemaking, correct?
Correct.
So you don't have to go through a legislative process. For those of you that are watching this that come from a lot of states, it's not as easy to even make a rule or change a rule as it is in a state like California, where they have the authority to make and change rules, where in other states, think of states like Minnesota and Virginia, where they have to draft legislation and go through that entire process to even change a rule. So that does make your life a little bit easier in terms of making change when it needs to be made, on the fly, so to speak. One of the other questions I wanted to ask you about that I think has been sort of a challenge for states, and we have a large student population that follows us, is testing during COVID. Tell me about the California experience. How do you feel like it is today? What do you foresee? How do you foresee it, getting back on track the way it used to be, so to speak?
It's been rough, let me tell you, because, in California, we test Monday through Friday. We do not take days off unless we have to in our testing facilities, because of our volume is so high.
Testing facilities? How many testing facilities?
We only have 2 testing facilities for our practical portion. So now most candidates will take the practical and the written on the same day so that they can pass their test. They're handed a license right at the same time. But you do have the option to reschedule your written portion and take it somewhere possibly closer to home, because we use a vendor for that that's spread out through California and has several facilities. Mm-hmm. So when the state closed down back in March, when COVID became a reality, we closed down as well. We were all sent home. We were all working from home. But obviously our exam sites couldn't work from home. So our exam sites shut down. We always run at about 30 to 60 days out for exams. So we had to call everyone and cancel their exams. We ended up having to do that, I want to say, at least 3 times, because we would never have thought we would still be here talking about COVID. Yeah. We thought we were going to be fine after a few weeks. So we ended up canceling people, rescheduling them, canceling them again, and rescheduling them, and then finally closing all of our exam sites completely. We have only recently reopened, and we've reopened at half capacities. We have our staff to think of as well. And we want to expose people to as little as possible. We want to make sure we're following social distance guidelines and keeping our staff as safe as possible. So we're only open right now at half capacity. I do not know when we will open up at full capacity. I don't see it happening anytime soon, because there's no vaccine, and we're not going to put our licensee or our applicants at risk, nor our staff at risk.
Right.
When we're at full capacity, we have 8 people in an exam room with 1 examiner, and those 8 people are next to each other, and they're not 6 feet apart. So what we've done is spaced them to every other station, and it's working fine. Our exams are going well. We're working with people who potentially have COVID. We don't want them to come to the exam site, so we're allowing people to contact us the day of the exam if they feel they have a concern that they don't want to show up. And so we're working with those candidates. It's going well, but it's going slow. And we're looking at ways to try to address our backlog at this point. We were closed for over 3 months of no exams. And even though our exam sites were closed, our licensing unit and our staffing here in Sacramento was not. We were working from home, or we were at small capacity within our office, but applications continued to come in. Schools were allowed to do online training, so we were still receiving applications. So we unfortunately now have a large backlog of examinations that we're trying to get through.
That's unfortunate. We all know how exciting it is when you graduate from school and you're ready to go and you want to have a job. And, we all have sympathy for the situation that everybody's in. I mean, it sounds kind of glamorous to get to work from home, but we all know that that was really hard. I mean, it was a really hard, I see that you're back in your office now.
Mm-hmm.
You can see that I'm still at home. And it is a bit of a challenge. It's hard to have all the resources for things you need. It is
Right.
difficult to sometimes put all the puzzle pieces together. And so I'm glad that you guys are at least back on track a little bit and being able to see some progress in that. So,
right.
So my last question to you, and then you can tell me whatever you want to tell me. You can ask me a question or you can tell me anything that you want to say. But my last question to you would be around, do you foresee any sort of changes in how we start looking? You and I have had this conversation. We've had it a lot across the country in terms of licensing of cosmetology and barbers ever becoming more, what's the word I'm looking for? Less comprehensive. So I'm not getting a umbrella license. We're starting to see some of the states go to, and I'm not really even asking your opinion. I'm just, do you foresee it happening where we would take somebody out of that, let's say in your case, 1,600-hour cosmetology umbrella and allow people to really get very individualized and specialized licenses, sort of in a broader way, and that those licenses would potentially be easier for somebody to be more mobile from state to state? Because one of the biggest problems I know you guys deal with is how many licenses do you get requests for reciprocity on an average month, year, day? Like, how many people want to come to California with a license from another state and work? How many of those applications do you get on average?
Thousands a month.
Thousands a month. And
Mm-hmm.
how long does that average take somebody for you guys to be able to vet that license, make sure that it's accurate, and allow them to work in the state of California? Is that a long process right now?
It depends, because there's several different pathways somebody could come to California. If you've been licensed for 3 of the last 5 years in another state, it's a pretty quick process for you to come in, apply, we can verify with your state, and you're good to go. You're going to get a license. But let's just say you were licensed for 2.5 years in your state, and you did even if you came from a school that were 1,600 hours, even if you came from a state that did more than 1,600 hours, took a test in that state, and then came into California, if you didn't meet the 3 of 5 year requirement, you would have to test again. And then to test again, you have to prove your qualifications again. So it can be cumbersome for some of our licensees if that's the category they fall into. And because there's a lot more documentation they have to provide to us than if they were just licensed 3 of the last 5 years. There's several states we can have online access to verify their licenses, and that's quick.
Yeah. So do you think that, I guess I'm answering my own question here. If we were to make more specialty licenses that were fewer hours, but more concentrated in a field, let's say I want to do nails and I can just really concentrate on nails and really get that education, does that make that process much more complicated then for the states, do you think? Or is it probably?
No, I think it's definitely something we'll be talking about here in California. We were up for our sunset review a year ago, and it was postponed because we wanted, the Senate wanted more time to really look at some of the issues surrounding the industry on a national level. And so our sunset review, which is where we can go in front of the legislature and really talk about things like this, was postponed for a year, and it should have happened in the last few months, but then COVID came, so now it's been postponed another year. So I do think in spring of next year, I think these conversations will be held at the state level, at the legislative level, and our board recommended us developing a hairstylist license to get it to be less hours, and for those who just want to do hair. There's a lot of people that want to go to school and they know they only want to do hair, so they don't want to learn the skin and nails aspects of cosmetology. So I definitely think it's going to be a big discussion for us in the spring of next year.
All right. Well, do you have anything else you want to add? Like anything you would want anyone to know about how about board works? How does somebody get on a board? Any of those kinds of things? What if somebody wants to be on a board? How does that, in your state, I know it's not an option, right? They have to be appointed.
They have to be appointed, right? So they obviously apply at the governor's website, and the governor, you know, like I mentioned, 7 of our members are governor appointees, so they have to go through the process through the governor's appointments office. And then for our Senate and Assembly, the same thing. They each have designated offices for how to appoint people. So it really has nothing to do with me.
Right. And
It has
California is
nothing.
not an option to just want to be on the board. You have to know.
No, it's a pretty long process. It's a pretty extensive application process that people go through and ultimately then get appointed. It's very different, and most licensees who come on our board are usually surprised because you know, once we're on the board, we are consumer protection, and we're not here to advocate for the licensees. It's been a big misconception in California with all the turmoil that our licensees have gone through, who we appreciate greatly. We appreciate our licensees. I'm not one, but I sometimes am at heart and think I am one by cutting and coloring my own hair all the time. But the licensing fees that people pay to the board are to support the enforcement activities of the board. And that's with any of our boards. That's the same with the medical board. It's the same with the dental board. You pay your fees to support the board, and the board's supposed to be enforcing the laws, taking care of the consumers who are receiving these services. None of those fees are to advocate for licensees. That's an association's job. That's what they do. That's why they have fees. That's their whole role. And so a lot of people didn't understand that. We've heard from so many licensees in the last few months that we've never heard from before, that really didn't really understand that. And we weren't able to answer all their questions about why did we close and why did we open, because we are a government agency and we take that direction from the people who are way smarter than us. That direction's coming down from the Department of Public Health and people who are really looking at the spread of the virus and how to stop the spread of the virus. Didn't come from anyone on our board or anyone on our board staff. So, but we take that direction and we take it and we run with it, and we will enforce it and to the best of our ability, because it's the direction that we've been given. And a lot of people didn't understand that. And a lot of people, I think, just started communicating with the board for the very, very first time. And so I hope they don't go away. I hope they understand that during, like we mentioned, the regulatory process, when we change a regulation or when we create a new regulation, we're required by law to promote that to the public. So we send out information, we hold public hearings just for those specific changes to the regulations. And it's discussed at multiple board meetings in public. And so I hope people see that there's a lot of opportunity for people to provide input to the board. And the board, I'm a very lucky executive officer. I have a great board who is very open to public input, and they take it very seriously. So hopefully people understand that and see that there's a process. Everything we do at the government agency has a process. Usually that process is set in law.
You know, what's interesting is, I will say, it reminds me of what we're all telling everybody to do, which is, get out and vote. Make your voice be heard. Go out and vote. If you sit at home on election days and something, as a rule passes in your state, or somebody gets elected to your school board that makes a bad decision, it's kind of on you, right? Because you didn't take your step. And I will say, being at a lot of California board meetings, that what you're saying is actually true. There is usually quite a good number of people in the audience, and there is ample time for everyone to be heard. Nobody is cut off. People get to voice their opinions. And to your point, maybe this is one of the upsides of COVID, is that people have become more familiar with your agency and
Right.
how they can be involved in making change and coming up with good ideas, or, listening to how a rule is written. And, when we were working on the rules, there were people that would stand up and say, okay, I looked at it and the way it's written, this is what I'm reading. And we all looked at that and thought, oh, that's right. That doesn't, we need to incorporate that a little bit differently. So I'm really glad that you brought up that point, because I do think that California does, your board meetings make every effort to incorporate whatever somebody, wants to say, good, bad, or otherwise, to be heard. You guys want them to be heard. So I appreciate your time. I love your own done hair. I wish I was that good at it.
I really would like to get back in a salon.
I don't know. You're pretty good at it. If I was that good, I probably would never go to a salon, but you can see how I'm wearing my hair these days, which is County feel. It's all managed, but you have done a fabulous job on your own. I look forward to a time when I can see you again in person, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for taking the time.